Greetings. I'm your host, Jason Myles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. If you are a returning listener or subscriber, welcome back. So glad to have you here. If you're new to the show, welcome. If you enjoy what you're seeing, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on the way out. If you don't like what you're seeing, leave a comment. Let us know. We still won't care, but let us know anyway. It's okay. It's fine. Uh-oh. I guess it's saying you can't hear. Hold on. See if we can fix that. I was excited. I was having a conversation with our guest before we started. And of all the people that we've had on the show, never have I been able to have a thrash metal conversation right off the bat. So that should let you know you're in for a good show tonight. It's just me tonight, MT and Pascal. Have the evening off. We're still going to the champagne room after the show. So if you're a patron, the link should already be up. Now on to the show. The state of the free press. Recently on TIR, we had journalist Kevin Gostala on to discuss the trial of Julian Assange and whistleblowers. Tonight, we're going to have a deeper dive discussion with the good folks at Project Censored to discuss the current media landscape. Has the internet truly democratized media, or has it been monopolized, much like mainstream legacy media? Is social media helping or hurting investigative journalism? Please give a big TIR welcome to, from Project Censored, Mickey Huff. Can you hear me now, Mickey? You can't hear me?
I am afraid I can't hear any audio, I'm afraid.
Oh, that is so weird. We were just talking to each other. In the bottom corner of the screen is a little cog thing. Oh, you can't hear me. I have to write this down. This is so weird.
Yeah, sorry, I can't hear you all.
This is where it's good to have an MT around because she can be mildly entertaining while we're trying to fix leftist audio, as you guys like to call it. I think that's funny that you guys call it that. But of course, this happens right as we go live. Mickey and I were literally having.
Yeah, sorry, no audio, man.
Oh, that is so weird. We're going to give Mickey a little bit to reset his system. I'm sorry about that. That is insane. We were literally having a conversation about mutual people that we knew in the metal scene. Can you hear me now?
How about now?
Can you hear me? I can hear you just fine. You still can't hear me.
Nope. I'm sorry. I have no audio for some reason. I heard you earlier.
That is so.
Let me go out the whole way and come back.
Yeah. Let's try that. This is so. And can you guys hear Mickey? What Jason really appreciates in these moments is random suggestions from the chat, fixing the stream. Exactly, because I don't think everyone knows what system I'm using, first of all.
I'm back. How's that?
Can you hear me? I can hear you just fine.
Ah, beautiful.
Oh, yes, now you can hear. All right.
I can hear you.
Woof.
Thank you. Good night.
Woof.
Sorry, man.
No, that's, hey, the people that watch these shows jokingly call it leftist audio. It is a thing that happens from time to time. I like to believe that it's the deep state trying to stop us, but it's not. It's just a little hiccup somewhere. But what I was telling everyone before we even get into this collection of underreported stories, Project Censored State of the Free Press 2024, was that you and I were bonding over our love for thrash metal, and Mickey is a shredder.
Indeed.
So that right there was like, okay, this is gonna be a fun show.
Oh,
And I'm already
thanks for the
invited him back.
KPFA shout out too there, I see.
Oh, there's some Bay listeners, and my mother is watching as well.
Right on.
Okay, that means I'm in trouble, I guess. I'll try to keep the curse words to a minimum.
Right on.
Or will I?
I'm FCC trained, so I can't get in trouble at Pacifica. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm in enough trouble just for being in that, in the nest of the left things.
I will say this. I will say this, and this is petty of me. Before I get to the first question, I'm looking in the back, and you have all your like thank yous and shout outs to all these people that I know. Nora Barrows Friedman, I know very well. We went to high school together.
She's a good friend of ours.
JG Michael got a shout out in here.
JG's awesome from Pittsburgh, man.
I forgot he is from Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And I'm like, everybody gets a shout except for TIR.
Well, that's going to change in the book where we're finishing right now. You're going to have your own paragraph after we do that music show. We're just going to go do that.
I was looking in here. I was like, even JG, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you do this stuff long enough, man, and you run into all kinds of people. So I'm beyond honored and stoked to be here with you and now be a more formal acquaintance of yours.
Yes, you are definitely coming back. But let's get into the book, and what I want to ask, not so much about the book, because the book is literally a collection of news articles that were underreported, and it would be foolish of me to sit here and ask you a million questions about over 100 stories.
Yeah, well, the first chapter is 25 stories, and then the rest of the chapters are analysis on what has happened to previously underreported stories, junk food news and the problems with it, then news abuse, then media democracy in action. And then we have a great chapter rounding it out on the importance of independent journalism by the great Max Alvarez, editor-in-chief over at the Real News Network. So yeah, there's a lot in the book other than the stories, and folks can get the stories online that are actually analytical reports written by students. So it's not the actual articles themselves. That's part of the critical media literacy education program we provide for people all over the country. But that stuff can be seen for free at projectcensored.org.
And so I wanted to ask you this. In the foreword of the book, Alan McLeod states, trust in journalism is at an all-time low. A 2022 Gallup poll found that just 1 in 9 Americans had confidence in TV news, and fewer than 1 in 6 believed in the printed news. What does that mean, that there is a failure of trust in journalism? It seems like, though, we love scandals. We will believe any scandal we hear, right? But when it comes to global affairs, anything political, we're going to get into that as well. I kind of touched on it. I'm sure you saw some of these talking points Lorna sent you. Political kayfabe.
Shout out to Lorna.
Yes, fat shout out to Lorna that puts a lot of these together. What does that mean, though, that there is a failure of trust in journalism? What does that mean as far as media literacy?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because the more media literate I think people become, critically media literate, the more they're aware of the shortcomings of the fourth estate. But we're having such a poor performance of the establishment press and legacy media in this country that, and for so long, that it's really caught up to them. And in many ways, the lack of trust is somewhat deserved. And before, I'm not going to be making a lot of binary statements, which might anger some people. I don't know. I live in the gray zone. Nuances are important things.
Yeah.
But in terms of the fourth estate, I can quote you from a few years back, for example. See if your audience remembers this gem. Sorry, it's a terrible thing to say, but bring it on, Donald. Keep going. It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS, exclaimed Les Moonves while he was executive chairman and CEO of CBS during the Morgan Stanley Tech Media and Telecom Conference the summer of 2016. He further noted, quote, I've never seen anything like this, and this is going to be a very good year for us, not big U BS. Well, yeah, a lot of BS, not capital U, capital S, but, small u and S, as in the shareholders, right? I mean, this is a brazen public example of these kinds of things that we could trot out. And over the years, particularly as news media went away from broadcast and into the cable realm and outside with different lack of FCC kind of oversight or regulations, and we could talk about what could be good about that. But some of the downfall of that is it's really contributed more to a return of opinion journalism and extraordinary partisanship that's further acted to divide the country in many, many ways for a profit. And actually, you hear Les Moonves talking about it. So, and this was exacerbated further by the poor coverage of the 2016 election. I know I mentioned it already, we'll not get too stuck back there, but we're kind of still stuck back there. We're like in an election feedback loop, man. It's like it's a redux of these things. And the press, even though they mea culpa after the 2016 election, we'll do better. They just took all the bait of Trump's fake news shenanigans and the way he weaponized that phrase. By the way, took it from the Democrats. Let's not forget that it was the Clinton campaign that started the fake news chatter about Russian interference in the election. And we won't get started on Russiagate just yet either. And those canards and nonsense that many and the liberals love to promote. I hope more on the left don't promote Russiagate, though I certainly see lots of folks still doing it. That's another can of worms. But regardless, Donald Trump ingeniously, as the con man that he is, he turned it around and weaponized it. Yes. And he started saying anything he disagreed with was fake news. And partisans began to understand some of the problems of the press. And certainly Republicans were looking for issues, right? And then Democrats became, oh my goodness, we thought we were going to win. We did win, but we lost. Like, thanks, Electoral College. But then they started looking for reasons, right? After the fact, how could we lose? What happened? Well, and some of that went back to the media. They gave them $6 billion of free coverage to Trump, $3 billion to Clinton, a little over 1 to 2 to Sanders, whom the Democrats just sacked, right? And a lot of people saw that. You don't see any big crowds right now. There's no 30,000 people coming out to see any of these lackluster candidates that are going on. But back then, there were 25, 30,000 people showing up, all ages, a lot of young people too. And those people saw what the media did. And the Democrats, after the 2016 election, admitted that they could rig the primaries and they could choose candidates in the back room, smoking cigars like they used to at Tammany Hall, because it wasn't illegal. And they said that out loud in a court case. It's a matter of public record. It was one of our previous underreported stories. So there's reasons that people are losing faith in the press. There's reasons people are losing faith in the electoral system and the two-party dominant system. And it's not all conspiracy theory, and it's not all hooey, right? And that's where we really need to get real about some of these criticisms and figure out which ones are attached to potential solutions, things we can actually do from the grassroots up.
What does that mean, though? How can I put this? Because you touched on the beginnings of cable news, and that's another, again, we only met briefly, and a big project I've been working on for the last couple of years is called Kayfabe, which is about the beginnings of cable news media and the beginnings of WWE pro wrestling. I juxtapose those two things because they happened around the same time.
Yeah, Matt Taibbi's talked about that.
He's talked about it. This is a lot more fun.
Yeah, true. Oh, yeah, true.
But we've seen the failures of the New York Times recently, right? When it comes to again, and at one point in time, there were the kind of the paper of record. That doesn't mean that everything the New York Times reports is false.
Correct.
And there becomes a flattening of understanding of, especially when we talk about politics, right? When, okay, they lied about this, they lied about everything. How do we cut through that and try to help people read and understand media?
Well, it'd be great if more people were reading, I think, media instead of, intravenously injecting it somehow or having it beamed into their eyeballs. So, and I've been teaching, this stuff for a couple decades, and I'm a big proponent of critical media literacy, pedagogy, education. I know there are multiple ways to go about this, and I know it's difficult to teach people who don't want to learn things or don't think they need to learn things. But I do think that there are viable ways through education, and again, our programming, like the Project Censored show, our documentary films. We too have joined the evil FANG social media club and internet club of the internet, right? We are on TikTok, and we are on these places doing short critical media literacy reels, like with Alan McLeod on how to deconstruct headlines, right?
Mhm.
How to read behind the scene, how to read behind things, how to understand things like framing. Look, this isn't really rocket science, right? Media literacy, however, just isn't taught. It's not part of the Common Core, really. It's suggested. It can be sprinkled around if you're lucky enough to have somebody that gets into your classroom that wants to teach it and links it to things. By the way, that's why we wrote The Media and Me, which is one of the very few critical media literacy books for young people, K-12 education. So we believe strongly that you got to start young, and you've got to be consistent about how it's doing it, teaching about multiple literacies, teaching about representation. I mean, I can go down that hole, that there's a lot of stuff we can be doing. But I think it's also the key of getting in front of those audiences, and not everybody's coming through community college or the university, and they're not really getting exposed to it in secondary education, which has been a big problem. There's only 5 states, better than it was last year, that really are mandating media literacy, and California just started this year. So that stuff's not even rolling out yet, even though some of our books and things are being used in these schools around one of the second largest in the country, actually. But I think that we need to spend more time trying to also train journalists that are media literate, so that it might be more likely that these folks that do go into legacy journalism are more aware of shortcomings at places like the New York Times. If you're lucky enough to get a gig at some place like that, you should really be honest about some of the reporting, some of the problems, the conflicts of interest, and so forth. But what we know is people begin to get into their careers, they begin to worry about that paycheck, and then they begin compromising any kind of morals or principles, or they abandon the Society of Journalists' professional ethics. And that's really problematic. And this is what we see happening in the latest fiasco at the New York Times and their bogus Hamas rape stories. So, we have our work cut out for us, right? There's enough hearsay and innuendo and speculation and opinion journalism around. When you have the major news outlets actively participating in it, it further builds public distrust, and it further separates and divides the public and makes discourse even less likely.
And you touched on this earlier when you talked about the fact that cable news comes to be and to fill time. And also they found out during OJ that opinion journalism, you don't need to know anything about a trial, and and we don't have to get into, as you call it, like potato chip kind of gossip,
junk food news,
true crime and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But you were in the Bay when Scott Peterson happened,
Yeah.
and since then there's been a pretty illuminating documentary that A&E of all people did on all of the facts that weren't reported. And it literally starts off with one of the journalists from KTVU News, which is a local station in the San Francisco Bay Area, saying, if you watched us and you think you know anything about the trial, you don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And that's how it starts.
Yeah.
So these opinion show, the Nancy Graces of the world, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, the Bill O'Reillys of the world, that really became quote unquote newsmen in this post Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite era. And those two were guys just reading the news.
Yeah. Well, I'd say Dan was worse, but we can parse that. Dan had a later in life mea culpa after he, that fiasco and after 9/11, but setting that aside.
but we were already programmed to see these news readers a certain way. That movie Anchorman makes fun of it, to me, in a smart way, where they love this guy that's in their house every day.
Yeah.
And we looked at these opinion people as newsmen, as journalists, as reporters. That's still kind of a problem, don't you think, when it comes to the way we're deciphering this stuff?
Absolutely, it's a problem. And a big problem too is public confirmation bias. And with social media algorithms and the, increased partisanship and changing rules after the Fairness Doctrine collapsed in 1987, after the Telecom Act in 1996, both Reagan and Clinton and the Gingrich regime contributing to those fiascos, really paved the way to just have more of this bottom line. I can't really justify calling it journalism, so let's call it opinion journalism at least. Or in many cases, what we see in the so-called hard news outlets isn't that much different than what we call junk food news in many ways. And like, for example, it's not just that this stuff is at TMZ or People Magazine. You've got allegedly serious journalists talking about the possibility of Taylor Swift being a deep state mole for the CIA, pimping for Biden. It's like, okay, man.
But is this a war then? Because news is profit.
Yeah.
Back to old quotes. There was a quote from the CEO of CBS before they sold it, which was, I don't care how much it costs to do a story. I got Jack Benny to make money.
Yeah.
The news used to be a loss leader.
Yes.
News stopped being a loss leader, had to make profit. Now we have for-profit news on another level where these people can demand millions of dollars in salaries. It feels like when you're talking about the junk food stuff, the Taylor Swift stuff, it feels like these are just people just searching for ratings and they're just searching for eyeballs. But what happens when news stops being about literally news and it's just a commodity?
Well, we're seeing the effects of what happens when news only becomes a commodity. Mm-hmm. It doesn't serve in the public interest. It doesn't produce solutions journalism. And we're seeing the same kind of problems from previous eras and and technological changes and challenges in media and journalism. We're seeing them mirrored in social media. We're seeing them mirrored at YouTube. We're seeing them mirrored on the internet. Yeah. In many ways, we're doing some of the same things with Mr. Beast and these other people, right? I mean, so it's again, this is why I sound like a broken record and come back to the critical media literacy issues, is because when people have the opportunity to learn some of these tools, and we wrote about them in Let's Agree to Disagree, we wrote about them in the United States of Distraction, Make America Think Again, ha ha ha, and we write about them every year in the Project Censored book, in the Media Democracy in Action chapter, where we highlight people that are doing things to combat these problems. And by the way, in this year's book, we included Jen Sanko, whom from Brainwashing My Dad, right?
Yes, who I interviewed, Jen.
Yeah. So this is what this book is about, and our website and all the work we do with the project. It's connected to critical media literacy education. We do it through news literacy. We were founded in 1976, before there was even a term for critical media literacy or media literacy education, when Carl Jensen founded it at Sonoma State in Northern California. He did it for 20 years and got hooked into the weeklies with Bruce Brugman in San Francisco and the Bay Guardian. And that's how they started getting the underreported stories out around the country to show what the corporate media wasn't covering. Right. And then Peter Phillips, sociologist, took over and started expanding the project with Andy Lee Roth. And then I came in and we took an affiliates program approach. So we work with campuses all over the country, professors and students, hundreds of students every year doing this kind of thing, producing this, showing people that we can be part of the solution by being the media. Now I'm riffing on Jello Biafra, right? Well, it's no accident that Jello was in San Francisco reading the Bay Guardian, seeing the Project Censored top 10 that he used for lyric ideas in the Dead Kennedys. Mm-hmm. So, and I met Jello and done things with him years ago, and I thought that was a fascinating connection given the metal punk roots we have. But I think again that it's so easy to be cynical when we see the challenges we face and we see the noise in the media ecosystem and the siloed for-profit news, right? Mm-hmm. That it is possible to get cynical, and people just write it off, and then it furthers their confirmation bias. They'll be like, well, at least I know what I'm getting when I go to Joe Rogan or Jimmy Dory or whatever. At least I know what I'm getting. So they think, right? Mm-hmm. Paging Dunning-Kruger Nation. Anyway, but this goes back to the very point again, right? We wouldn't have Dunning-Kruger problems. We wouldn't have as many cognitive bias problems and implicit bias problems if people were more media literate. And so we try to do that in our books, online, on the radio, everywhere else. We try to do it everywhere we can and see what sticks, man. Because as Nick Johnson once said, FCC chairman, if media reform and media democratization, isn't your first priority, it's better be your second, right? Because you're never going to get anywhere with your first priority, whatever you want to do in life, whatever your activism is, unless you have access to these platforms, unless you have media freedom, right? Which is why we're staunch free press advocates. We're staunch opponents of censorship. We're part of the National Coalition Against Censorship. We're part of Banned Books Week Coalition. We practice what we teach. I go back to the anti-PMRC days, man, with Lee Snyder and and Frank Zappa and that kind of stuff. So I'm it kind of like runs in my veins, the anti-censorship stuff. And I think that it is important that people see garbage and falsehood in society, so we don't have some parentalism. We don't have some kind of like parochial control over information. But the antidote to that isn't censorship and so-called fact-checking, where the fact-checkers have just as many biases as anybody else. Hello, NewsGuard. Hello, Atlantic Council at Facebook. So this is really why I keep coming back to the educational angle, is because it's something that's harder to corrupt, although education is entirely corrupted. But when you're using critical pedagogy in the classroom, you are free academically to do these things, and you can still do it. And so that's why I say cynicism is dangerous. Skepticism is not. Healthy skepticism is a good thing, but there's a difference. Skeptics want to learn about the truth, and they want to share things. They want to maybe work to improve things. Cynics are in the process of giving up. Right. And cynicism is tragic in a lot of ways, because, paraphrasing George Carlin, if you scratch the surface of a cynic, you see a disappointed optimist. And I think that the further and further we go down this black hole of, fake news and partisan news and total distraction in our media, a collapse of our political system, a collapse of our public institutions, it's going to get harder and harder to claw our way back.
That's how I feel. And that's literally the impetus of the show when I started it 5 years ago.
Kudos to you for that, man.
Thank you. And also shout out to Jello Biafra. There's an insignia that you don't see. It's kind of covered in all this stuff, but it looks like an upside down cross with a dollar sign, and that is totally something that we stole from the dead Kennedys.
Oh yeah.
Should a good journalist strive for objectivity, or is that simply a myth propagated by mainstream media to be perceived as more honest?
Well, when it was more the former, if it ever was, it wasn't a horrible concept, but it's far more the latter. And it's certainly transformed that way and been weaponized, where objectivity is now a tool of saying, well, you're not an objective media. You're not objective, right? You're not objective. Well, again, often you'll see the places saying this, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, etc. Those are hardly objective outlets.
Exactly.
And so I think it gets dangerous when they start using it as a ruse to cover up for the fact that they have these biases. But this is why when you take a look at the top stories that we review every year and the ones that get in our book that we replatform to say this is what great independent journalism in the public interest looks like, we're never saying it's, quote, objective. And when and Howard Zinn, you can't be neutral on a moving train. And we go back, I'm an historian by day too, so you'll see some of that. Sometimes that slips in or slips out. But going back to this idea of objectivity, you go back to the 50s, George Seldes, you said like the job of journalism isn't to be, quote, objective and both sides things to death. It's to tell the public what's really going on, to try to help people understand what's happening. And so if objectivity translates into fairness or transparency, if it follows the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, very important things, then if that's what it looks like to be, quote, objective, then I'm all for it. But it is far more the case these days that that's implied but not practiced by a lot of the legacy and establishment outlets. So we usually try to dispose people of the notion that there's this perfect objective objective source at truth.com or something. And then they just can, but again, it's all about outsourcing it. I don't want to do the job. I don't want to think critically. It hurts. Cognitive dissonance. Ouch. But that's how we learn. That's what we have. And we don't want to outsource that and have AI and big tech and algorithms, rewiring our brains, which they're doing, right, by addicting us to screens. The same people, the same technology that was designing the casinos and the gambling machines are all behind anti-social media, etc. It's like we need to be careful about this. And I think that, again, a lot of what we do recently too is we focus a lot of our attention on criticism of big tech and the influence they've had both in media and on journalism itself.
That's the thing, though, about this addiction to screens and the ubiquitous nature of getting all of our information through social media and through our phones through social media, right? I was privy to being in a very large marketing conference at Facebook in 2014. One of those things we got to sign an NDS. Right. And they admitted the fact that they were a news organization, because Mark Zuckerberg came and goes, I know that people get their news from Facebook. And the whole thing they were talking about was like losing a certain amount of eyeballs to YouTube, because YouTube was really blowing up at the time, and they were rolling out videos and kind of presenting them a little differently and all this other stuff. And that was going to be the one thing that they had that these other places didn't have, was their ability to be the news source. And I think, again, this was 2014. I feel personally that it was trumped, pardon the pun, by Twitter. And I do feel it was a political move for Elon Musk to buy Twitter, because if this is where people are getting their news and you can control that flow, and have that amount of influence over what people deem which is true or false, is frightening.
It is extraordinarily so, which, and again, broken record time, the more media literate people are, the less susceptible they are to this kind of brainwashing, repetition, appeals to emotion, appeals to confirmation bias. I mean, you look on the cover of the book this year, and you'll see we've got a little bit of the Murdoch looking at the burning the Tucker Carlson money on that lawsuit they were gonna go down on. Then you got your buddy Bill Gates, right, funding media all over the world, and then you got Elon and the Twitter barfing up the X, right, the dead Twitter. And notice the stars are going out and the stripes are getting bent, a la Ani DeFranco, right, old school. This is the power media have. Right. And that's why we've been writing about the billionaire press. The last two books we had, Andy Lee Roth and I, we couldn't help. We were riffing all about the billionaire press in the tech sector, and the influence of Jeff Bezos, of Elon Musk, of Bill Gates, of, the tyranny that is Apple under Tim Cook. I mean, I'm probably just alienated a bunch of lefty folks there. So
that's fine.
With the Apple badge. But look, all that tech stuff is bad. Right. All the cobalt mining is not good, and driving, another kind of genocide in the Congo that no one wants to talk about. Right.
Not really. It's uncomfortable.
It's totally. And we're relying on it. In fact, machines we're talking on right now are part of that problem. Right. And so it's difficult to address and not somehow be caught in that feedback loop. Right. Where we're using these tools, and at the same time, we're trying to dismantle this kind of, I'll say it, right, it's techno and settler colonialist mentalities, right, that are fueling these things. And so we've been trying to call a lot more attention to what we call censorship by proxy. Because censorship in the traditional sense, as it's protected or not permitted under the First Amendment, right, prior restraint, when corporations are owning what should be the public press, the media, they have proprietary protections over it, and they get to decide what the news is, right? Fox News said that years ago in the Tampa case, where they said, we paid several $1 billion for these news stations. We'll tell you what the news is. And then you just gave the example of Elon Musk and his political interest in Twitter, right, as a megaphone, right, for political and cultural control and manipulation. Hello, Edward Bernays.
And everybody was making, this is the thing that I thought was so funny about that. A guy named Lester Spence had actually wrote a kind of interesting essay about this. Everyone was making fun of Elon Musk. He was the great, Twitter's going down and blah, blah, blah. A, it hasn't gone down. And B, he may be hemorrhaging money from it, but it's money he has to hemorrhage. And it's still affecting the discourse, for better or for worse. I mean, I've said it on this show, him kind of coming in and let people go willy-nilly with whatever they want to do. We are being able to see a lot of images that maybe would have been constrained a little bit. We can see everything about Gaza now.
Yeah, well, somebody should alert the New York Times.
And I think that's helped change the way it's viewed in my 46 years of life.
It has.
This is the first time, and I'm sure it's the same for you, where you're seeing people that might have maybe been apolitical, maybe even conservative, say Israel's gone too far.
Yeah,
Pretty much
well,
everyone I've talked to, Israel's gone too far.
yeah. Well, we've been covering the issue of Israel-Palestine going back to our inception. You know, we've had stories about, you know, the settler colonialist behaviors going on there going back decades, right?
Mhm.
And that's not a popular thing to say. And then you get into the whole attack canard that if you mention any criticism of Likud, Netanyahu, the right wing in Israel, you get the anti-Semitism trope.
Yeah.
And then you have to spend all kind of time issuing disclaimer after disclaimer. Dave Zirin just wrote about this the other day, not long ago, you know, about this issue, you know. And it's really a roadblock in a lot of ways. They're discussion stoppers, right? There are things that are roadblocks that are put up that says you're not allowed to talk about this issue, right? Yeah. And again, that's censorship. Whether it's a corporation doing it, that's censorship by proxy. But in some of the cases of like Elon Musk, and by the way, Trump was doing this too, but the Biden administration and a couple of our stories in the top 25 this year talk all about it, like the Twitter files. But again, the left has an allergy to Taibbi. And so they don't like, they can't just look at the material and say, yeah, there's a problem here. We don't like Matt, that's okay, but let's not shoot the messenger all the time. Like, right, let's take a look at what the stories were. And the Biden administration and various agencies were manipulating content and telling these outlets to suppress information, which is flat out wrong, period. Yes. I don't care who's in office and what the rationale is, whether they think they're fighting fake news or whatever they think they're doing. Hello, Disinformation Governance Board, Ministry of Truth. Fortunately, that collapsed, but I'm sure it's reincarnated, just like COINTELPRO with another banal technocratic name, bureaucratic name. But nevertheless, we covered these issues because when the corporate media covered that, it went immediately left, right, went immediately partisan. Nobody bothered to want to look at the actual material. And then this is how ridiculous it is. You've got like far right-wing Republicans all of a sudden interested in censorship. They're busy banning books in Florida, but now they're all of a sudden interested in what's happening at Twitter, right? The hypocrisy is so extraordinary and obvious and ludicrous. Again, even people with minimal or rudimentary media literacy skills can smell there's something deeply wrong with the media ecosystem.
But it became a big deal for some friends of ours, even in this space, that maybe they went down a bit of a rabbit hole too deep, as that can happen. But I will say the partisanship that people have when they digest media now, especially with the internet, kind of gets into my next question. And I think it's problematic when you talk about things like the Twitter files, because for people to trust Matt Taibbi, he has to be a hammer and sickle communist. And it's like, well, he's just a news guy.
Yeah. He's a neo gonzo news guy, you know, that fashions some things after the Hunter Thompson style, but less egregiously so.
But you know what I mean? He's a news dude.
Yeah,
he cares more about that than, you know.
He's an award-winning journalist.
I've quoted him before.
He wrote the foreword to our 21 book. It was fantastic.
I'm not going to sit here and shit on him, but you know, we understand that there is media consolidation with legacy media in the digital age. It might be easier to get information out, but do you find it harder to get it heard than before? And I'll add this extra caveat onto it. I'm a big fan of physical media. Living in Mexico,
right on.
People usually don't. I usually tell them, don't bother mailing it to me. It's going to take me an extra day to get it, and I have to start reading these things right away, right? And getting this and being able to highlight stuff in it felt really good, and I appreciate physical media.
Did the same,
right? But
dog ears and all.
But we have to be realistic. It's 2024.
Yeah, man.
Is it hard? And we talked about music when we first, introduced each other.
Yeah.
I know that releasing a song is like a fart in the wind, brother. Is it the same way when it comes to news, in your opinion?
Kinda. And, it really is in some ways, because of the medium is the message, because of the way in which the similarities there are in the platforms about how people are getting a lot of their information. the fact that over half of people in the country now are getting information from places like Facebook or social media platforms is, again, it's not necessarily that it's like, oh, Facebook is a trusted source necessarily. It's that's how they're accessing it, right? And but again, media literacy would dictate who are the owners, what are the relationships with the advertisers, is there fear and favor here, what's the relationship to the sourcing, who's a news maker, who's a news shaper, whose voices aren't heard, does the public have any feedback mechanism, is there any way to give flack, is there any way the public can influence these private for-profit platforms outside of like massive boycotts and things like that to impact capitalism and the bottom line of these things. And then, of course, the ideological biases of these things. You can tell I'm paraphrasing Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman's propaganda model from 1988's Manufacturing Consent, borrowing Ed Bernays and Walter Lippmann's terminology from the 20s, saying it was a good idea. Herman and Chomsky said, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. It's not good for democracy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, again, if people are just armed with that kind of power that knowledge gives, being that, news media literate, they can start asking the questions about the sources. They can start wondering how consolidation of media works. They can start looking at who is Meta and what do they own, Facebook, Instagram, and a bunch of other stuff, Alphabet, Google, YouTube, and a bunch of other stuff. Bill Gates, the whole Microsoft universe, Tim Cook, Apple, that whole universe, FANG, right? The acronym. That's where we're seeing tons of it's invisible censorship, from the algorithmic censorship, bot censorship, shadow banning, like our allies and colleagues over at Mint Press News, Alan McLeod himself. They were censored through PayPal, right, where they got demonetized, and YouTube will demonetize these people to try to silence them and shut down their voices. And so there's rabid censorship on the internet, but at the same time, as you alluded to, there's also still some ways that information gets out. It may not stay there, Wayback Machine, but it's there, and that's undeniable. So I'm back in nuanced land with you, right?
Yeah.
It's not just all one thing or all another, but the more aware we are of how it works and the more we understand how that's impacting us and others, then we can maybe navigate it more wisely and potentially be more meaningfully civically engaged.
We always release stuff. I write these columns in Sublation magazine and Damage magazine, and I'm all proud, but it goes out, and I don't know if anyone is reading it, or because there's so much out there.
Lots
I'm
of
a
noise.
very small fish. Once you decide to do something on the left, you are even a smaller fish in a very right. You know what I'm talking about. We didn't go where the money is. Right?
No, really? I'm out of here.
So it's competing against an algorithm. Every show I do, every show I do on this channel, once it's done, once the live stream is done, I then find out that it can't be monetized.
Yeah, no.
So I have to ask for a physical review, and more often than not, they say no. So it is extremely hard to kind of break through when you're doing this. So I want to first of all commend you, because it is a labor of love at a certain point, and you're a true believer in your cause. So
yeah, and I mean, I'm an educator by day. I'm a professor. I'm a chair of a journalism department at a very large community college in the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area. I've been there 20 some years. Taught a bunch of other places. Again, it's education. By the way, I grew up in outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I really got into, I had parents that were into the media of the day then, the news then. They had subscriptions. We were fortunate enough to have encyclopedia at our house. I grew up in a working class, family, but my parents loved art and reading, and so we had access to this stuff. And so, I really started seeing news and world events at an early age, like the 1980 election, right, where I voted for Carter in 4th grade or whatever.
Yeah.
My point is that I really got tuned in through music. I started playing music, and then that's where I started to find the rock and punk lyrics, really, anti-authoritarianism, and that really that really led me even further over to being more media literate or aware of propaganda and censorship. And I was listening to the Dead Kennedys and Jello Biafra. So that's this weird connection to Project Censored. I move out to California way later. I start hanging out with Peter Phillips. Watch what you wish for. I've been the director of Project Censored for almost 15 years. But see, it's informed from there. And I was a teacher of music as a teenager. And so that just kind of bled into my adulthood, and it's in the DNA again, that I feel that I have some obligation or responsibility to try to share these kind of things with people and facilitate it in a way that they can use it and that they can better their lives with it, and they can become more informed about it, right? And so that is the labor of love part that you're talking about, that unfortunately higher ed administrators can exploit, right? By having you do all the things, right? Because once they find out you're good at something, watch out, you'll be doing them all. But again, I think I guess it also then goes to the root of the kind of society we are becoming, right? I mean, that all factors into this. And so, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I do is very interdisciplinary for that reason. You know, one of the books we did a couple of years ago with Nolan Higdon, The United States of Distraction, we starts with a Lao Tzu quote: "If you do not change direction, you may end up where you are heading." Are we there yet?
That's the question I don't want to. I have a good friend that says that we are in the middle of collapse. We just don't know what collapse looks like, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Jared Diamond, the late great Jared Diamond, Collapse: How Societies Choose to Succeed or Fail from the Guns, Germs, and Steel Legacy. Fantastic book Collapse was.
Switching gears.
Yep.
Kind of. When Donald Trump coined the term, he made it popular. Okay? He made it popular.
Absolutely.
The term fake news, for some people, it felt like he was going to explain how the sausage was made and expose the political kayfabe that we are subject to. Instead, fake news is still news. Trump, as well as his Democratic Party foes, engage in this political theater. How can we begin to break through and get beyond this political kayfabe?
Well, again, media literacy and public interest, independent public interest journalism, right? And we write, Victor Pickard at UPenn and the Mike Center has done a lot of great work on this. His great book came out a couple of years back called Democracy Without Journalism. It's an extraordinary book, very much in the vein of the kind of scholarship and critical media literacy that the great Bob McChesney has done for decades. You know, we have, interestingly, a fortunate legacy of muckraking journalism and media criticism in this country that does go back 100+ years.
Yes.
Ida Tarbell, Lincoln Steffens, Shame of the Cities, Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair, man. Well, sorry, Bob LaFollette. I was reminded of this from Norm Stockwell over at the Progressive magazine, Madison, Wisconsin, started by LaFollette in 1909, part of the big progressive movement in the early 20th century. He was starting that magazine and was a press critic 10 years before Upton Sinclair wrote The Brass Check, which was a scathing critique of journalism at the time. And so by going back and looking at these kinds of examples, and the George Seldies and Edward Murrows and I.F. Stones, Izzy Stones, Park Center Izzy Awards just came out. If you don't know about it, look up the Izzy Awards. So there's these signposts, you know, and then McLuhan was another one. Daniel Borston, a historian in the early 60s, 1961, wrote a book called it was called The Image, a guide to pseudo events in America. And he was looking at the way television was affecting elections and the way it was affecting debates and dialogue and discourse. And along comes Marshall McLuhan. And then again, you get into the 70s and you see Project Censored coming out of the ashes of Watergate, coming out of what takes place in the church committee hearings. And Bernstein, right? Carl Bernstein in Rolling Stone, 1977. Gonzo, there is another connection up to Taibbi, Rolling Stone. Bernstein wrote about how the CIA was all over the American newsrooms, and the Mighty Wurlitzer played on. Right. And then in the 80s, we had Chomsky and Herman. And we've had, of course, the great Michael Perenni, who worked with us for years. Absolutely going back further to Ramparts, Bob Scheer and those folks. Absolutely. But so there's all these examples. There's this history, but this is that unhistory, right? To paraphrase Peter Kuznick and Oliver Stone. It's the stuff that's out there that we don't get taught or is not widely available. And a lot of folks don't know it's there. And that's really part of the problem. So back to your issue of this kayfabe and this other issue, these issues of like this total crass commercial, private, for-profit media, they don't want us to have access to that stuff. They don't want to look at that yet. Pike Committee too. Church really had a lot of damning things that went public. And again, FOIA, big time shout out to Jason Leopold and those folks who are sort of FOIA masters. In fact, the U.S. government referred to Jason Leopold as a FOIA terrorist. So I look at that as a badge of honor in a lot of ways. But see, again, this goes back to the solution of education and of community-based education and of teaching about how people can be the media and be responsible stewards of reporting on what happens in their own communities in their own voices, right? That's why we need community media. I have a show on KPFA in Berkeley, California, the flagship station, 75th anniversary this year, flagship station of Pacifica. And it is also the first community radio model, right? KDKA was the first commercial model, 1920 in Pittsburgh. KPFA started as a pacifist network to counter the early days of the military-industrial complex and undue corporate influence in the media of the time. As we saw more rivalry between radio as the new technology and the newsprint media, and then we saw the advent of television, and that's what Daniel Borston, the historian, was warning about, and McLuhan wrote about it too, how that was shaping. So in my mind, if you understand that history and where we've been, yes, shout out to KBOO, absolutely, and KLW, and there's so many, KSKU and Ashland. So we have these resources, but we have to support them. And part of that means turning off this nonsensical commercial media and supporting your local media, getting involved in your local media and helping them thrive. If you're going to buy our book, please buy it from us, buy it from Powell's, buy it from your favorite independent bookstore. Don't get it at Amazon. Don't give the fang more tooth, as it were, right? Don't feed it. Don't feed the bite, do what we can, how we can. And I know that, again, that's pretty much an anarchist ethos, right? And there's a lot of truth to it. And we cannot, we're like tilting at these big corporate windmills in so many ways. But when the corporate agendas and many of the deep state government agendas, I'm using deep state, not in the aerial quotes, but in the way Peter Dale Scott, the great scholar, used it, about there being undue influence and conflict of interest, like Lincoln Steffens wrote about 100 years ago between the business sector and government, right? When that's happening, we don't really have rights for everyone. We don't really have media in the public interest. We have a corporatist state, right? And it operates with an extraordinary bias that it then refers to as objectivity, which is the ruse we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So I think part of the solution here, not just education, is to support independent local media as much as you can to combat the growing news deserts created by hedge funders buying up these media outlets and trying to put mom and pops out of business.
Excuse me. I do want to get into that because, excuse me. Sorry about that. As we're coming up on an hour, first of all, I do want to say thank you for taking the time to talk with me, Mickey. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad we exchanged information beforehand because this
Honor is
conversation
mine, man. I'm honored to be here with you.
Is going to keep going privately.
Yes.
That being said, there is a love affair, and I started the show off with asking the question about we love scandal, and political kayfabe plays into scandal oh so well. In my upcoming series that will eventually get done. It's been taking a couple of years. But I there's a thing in wrestling. I don't know if you ever watched any pro wrestling.
I grew up with Bruno Sammartino and Andre the Giant and the Iron Sheik and the Cold War playing out. That was Steubenville wrestling, man. I watched that when I was a kid. So before it got bigger.
So as it gets a little bigger and towards the, right after the Cold War in about 95, 96, I remember the year, there's this big match that plays out in Montreal, and it's known forever as the Montreal Screwjob. It's Bret Hart against Shawn Michaels, and Bret Hart is leaving WWE to go to WCW. A competing promotion, and WWE has been losing a lot of their stars at this time, and Bret Hart doesn't want to surrender the title to Shawn Michaels. So of course we know in wrestling everything is preordained. You're the title
like in
holder.
Politics.
Yeah, kinda, right? This guy gets the eyeballs, he gets the title. So Bret Hart says he doesn't want to give the belt to Shawn Michaels, and allegedly Vince McMahon double crosses him. There's a double cross in a double crossing industry, And there's this whole thing, they call it the Montreal screw job. But what's interesting to me about the Montreal screw job is because it kind of also mirrors a new form of media that we're getting addicted to at the same time in the mid 90s, which is daytime television.
Yeah,
The one thing daytime television starts to do, as the Jerry Springers of the world and the
not
Maury
the Phil
Kovacs,
Donahues.
not the Phil Donahue, and to her credit, Oprah don't do this because there's serious news people at the time. Well, Phil Donahue was always a different breed, but what they do is they kind of break that fourth wall. If you remember when there's, you are not Laban Deviantier, you are not the father. And then they would follow the screaming chick into behind the thing, and they would have this moment where you see Jerry or Maury be so would show all this heartfelt sincerity for feeling the pain of this thing. So you're seeing like the real person, right? You're getting to know the real guy. And the same thing happens with this Montreal screw job. These wrestlers do something that they had never done before. They went on the next day, real sports shows, and had this fight, if you will. But it was all kayfabe. At a certain point, like, look, we can do the fake stuff, but we have to show them kind of sort of how the sausage is made, because it's always working. It's always, it's called a work and a shoot, right? It's always moving. And in this era right now where it's always, there's a little bit of truth you see, there's a whole bunch of smoke and mirrors. And there's an addiction that we have to the drama.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This presidential election, which nobody wants to see.
Yeah. No.
There's going to have to be some drama.
Well, there's plenty of that. There's plenty of drama.
But not the drama like Israel.
Well,
Palestine.
not the real drama, the manufactured drama. The
manufactured
back
drama.
to Borston. Absolutely. Manufactured distractions. That's what this book was about. That's what this book addressed to try to solve. Well, you know, writing books for people that don't read is probably not stupid of me. But again, you know, this is not a new thing. It's just been exacerbated by the wild individual access people have in, you know, the weird Ayn Rand world of the internet, you know, and with Atlas shrugging it at every app. You know, and this is something I think that is, well, it was predicted in a lot of ways, going back, you know, to Orwell and others. But the consequences, I think, are a lot uglier when we're witnessing them in slow motion train wreck style, right? With the mess that our whole political culture is in, civic decay, erosion of trust in institutions. These aren't happy things. But they didn't just happen, man. They didn't just happen. They're orchestrated and they've been happening. And there's people benefiting from the destruction and the chaos, just like in Palestine. There are people benefiting from, you know, the crisis, the financial crisis that was created, right? Just like back at Morgan's in the 20s, you know, almost 100 years later. Let's play that game again. So these are real forces. And again, if people are aware of them more, if people understand how these are more civically literate, media literate, financially literate, you know, not educated institutionally in a way from the top down that means you have right answers for the test, but taught critical thinking skills and independent skills, right? And I know that's even been weaponized. It's like, oh, do your own research on the internet. You know, it's like, yeah, man, I do a lot of my own research, but I'm not QAnon, you know, and I'm not like the dude with the, you know, the Fred Flintstone Poobah Lodge hat on or something, you know? It's like, give us a break, man. We're back to that nuance riff. It's like, come on. You know, it's like, I don't think it's all the same when I'm researching something and you've got these other people that are just like, I told the internet what I wanted and now it's mine. I am right. Pizzagate, fill in the blank. And how about this? Not all scandals and conspiracies are created equal. Some scandals are real, not Kategate. That's an example of how media goes awry and it goes viral, right? Going back to 1710 with Jonathan Swift. Falsehoods fly and the truth comes limping after. Wow, is that on steroids now? You know what I mean? And those are some serious negative consequences of it. But the flip side of that is there are real conspiracies and there are real scandals. Back to Watergate, right? Yeah. Back to the fact that the two corporations and after the 88 election got, you know, two major parties got together with corporate backers and created their own private corporation so that they could control the future of presidential debates, right? And so that turned that into a total image facade from there on out, where they controlled what the questions were, they controlled what people could do, but it was all presented as though it is political theater, but it was presented as it was a legitimate dialogue, and that's just not the case, right? And we're seeing that mirrored in a lot of other, social media outlets. But back again to the point, I think again our antidote to this, right, is not to only bemoan the problems, and it's important to understand the problems, but not just to bemoan those, but to also take a look at what can be done, look at models of who's been doing things in the past and what might work or what we can modify in the present or the future. And guess what? We're going to have to come up with some new ideas. We're going to have to come up with some new ways to do things, right? And there were some great organizations, some folks were mentioning here, like Muck Rock, Electronic Frontier Foundation, who we've worked with. There's a lot of groups and a lot of folks doing a lot of great work. And that's really what Project Censored celebrates every year, while exposing underreported stories that the corporate media don't cut or legacy media don't cover, or when they do, they spin them wildly. We're simultaneously celebrating the importance of independent media in the public interest by showcasing what we think are the most factual and significant stories of the year, chosen by our 20-some judges and experts and academics and journalists from the independent sphere that rank them. So you can go to projectcensored.org to learn all about that. Check out our books, check out our stuff at the Censored Press. We publish other books too. Nowadays, including a graphic novel on teaching during the pandemic.
Ooh, that sounds
another
really
week.
interesting.
Yeah, it's Adam Bessie's book. I work with Pete Glanting, called Going Remote, and also Kevin Gostola's Guilty of Journalism: The Political Case Against Julian Assange.
We had him on Tuesday.
Yep, Kevin's great. Yeah, absolutely. I just talked to him again for an update next week on the Project Censored show. So anyway, short of it is this. Thank you so much for having me on to talk about the work that we do at Project Censored. Please feel free to check us out at projectcensored.org. We have a lot of free resources there, like the ones I've been talking to you about, including a free teaching guide for The Media and Me for K-12, free teaching guide for this book, State of the Free Press 2024. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can contact me through the website. And again, it's been a real honor, and I'd love to hear from your viewers, listeners. They got ideas. They want to share things, constructive criticism. I get enough hate mail as it is, so no thanks. But if you want to give me some help, man, I'll always take it. Teachers are privileged because we always get to learn. And that's why I love what I do. And I think it's a privilege to do it. And I thank you, all the folks that are here. And again, it's been a fantastic discussion, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, look, Mickey, I'm not done with you quite just yet. I do appreciate your time. Well, there's one question. We have a super chat here from TIR listener Dizzle McFizzle. What's Mickey's opinion on the hose? Loyal, not loyal? Explain.
I'm going to need help with the definition. You mean Upton Sinclair? Do you mean the brass check? Do you mean the brass check that were chits for the brothel, and he was likening journalists of his day to prostitutes working for whoever would pay them to spread whatever falsehoods they wanted? If that's the analogy,
well,
I guess
look,
I could
you
go
know
there
what,
with
Dizzle,
Sinclair.
I think Mickey said the hoes aren't loyal.
I'm gonna get in trouble now with sex workers, man.
Oh yeah. No, it's not. It's not those. It's the media.
Not the same.
No, it's the media host.
Well, there you go, man. Yes. I'm afraid so. And Upton Sinclair said it better than I did. Yeah. So check out his free 1919 book. He published it himself independently and disseminated over 150,000 copies for free. Get yours.
People are, oh my God. For some reason, I don't know how this question got started on the show, but the hose.
No, good. Thank you.
It's always moving for whatever the topic is about, to be honest with you.
Understood.
So no, it's not. It's not about sex workers.
Well, no. Yeah, I was being remotely facetious and disclaiming.
You just. I don't want you to get beat up. I don't know if you got to go to the Tenderloin for anything.
No, I haven't been for a while, man. No, I'm good. But no, man. In all seriousness, I do encourage people to go and check out some of that media criticism from 100+ years ago, because it's really very similar to the kind of things we're doing today. We're just changing some of the specificity around it. Mm-hmm. So it's not new because it's still rooted in capitalism. And that all these other distractions always try to keep us away from talking about class and class analysis, which Michael Parenti did and does and has done for so long and did so well in the books he did on make-believe media. He was a Project Censored judge, wrote the 20th anniversary intro, talking about media filters and riffing on the propaganda model. So yeah, if the people that are abusing the journalistic profession for money, if that's kind of what you're getting at, then I have real problems with that. And I think it's unethical, and it's really ripping us apart ripping apart the fabric of our culture.
You heard it here first, or didn't hear it here. You just heard it here. Mickey Huff, thank you so much for coming on, Mickey. I appreciate you. I have your information. I'm going to send you that. I'm going to send you Teenage Anarchist. I'll be up north. Hopefully we can meet.
Absolutely. Please get in touch, and I'd love to talk again. Love to do the music show, and thanks to you and all the great folks that joined us this evening. Again,
before I let you go, you still play guitar?
Oh yeah, all the time. In fact, I got the Gary Holt ESP over here.
Okay, I have some special strings. I'll send you as well. I tuned to drop F sharp, so it's
dude, you're an In Flames guy. They're B flat, yeah.
F so yeah, G flat, yeah.
What are you, a 7-string?
No.
Oh,
standard
wow, you're
scale
just
6.
tuning way down. What are you using? Trees?
Yeah, 73 to 13.
There you go, dude. I'm still in the D standard, drop C, drop B, kind of world. I tried 7-string for a bit. My hands are a little small for a shredder growing up playing Malmsteen. So
I'm gonna give you some of these. We'll talk.
Good.
But I got some stuff for you because I don't play anymore. So I have too much stuff.
We gotta change that.
I got too much stuff right now.
I understand. I'll compare calendars. You'll see how dumb busy I am, and you'll change your mind. Or I'll try to change it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mickey.
To persuade you.
But I'll send you some stuff. And again, thank you for this. I appreciate you, brother.
My pleasure, man. Right back at you. Thank you so much.
Have a very good night, Mickey.
You too.
That was Mickey Huff from Project Censored. Wherever you are watching or listening to the show, there's links in the description to this book, State of the Free Press 2024. It is a collection of very important news stories that I think people will find extremely interesting. Also shout out to Lorna, the publicist, who sends me a lot of these people. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate her. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. We're still going to the champagne room because there's nonsense we have to talk about, right? We have to talk about the nonsense. I just want you guys to know, last night, did not know my mom was watching. Told that whole story, and she heard it all. If you want to know what I'm talking about, watch the Red Zone show from last night. Stop laughing at me. If you are a patron, the link is up in the champagne room where we'll be ready to go. Give me about 5 minutes. If you want to join us in the champagne room, sound off on how you feel about this show. There's only one way to do it. Become a patron for as low as $3 a month, $30 for the year. You can have access to champagne rooms past and present. You can join us for movie night, which is coming up again. We're going to watch a very, very well done documentary on the LA riots. The anniversary of the LA riots is coming up. We're going to do some shows about that later this month. It's going to be a good time. Also, if you're listening on Apple, just subscribe. You can have access to the champagne room. You can hear all the nonsense. Do you know what happened in the last champagne room? Derek Varn created a new slur.
Because I nut quick.
Whoa. So that alone should be enough for you to want to come hang out with us. But until then, thank you again, Mickey. This was fun. And we are out.